They say silence is peace. But in some places, silence is a curse. Long before maps were drawn and borders carved, there was a village hidden deep in the hills of a nameless land. No roads led to it, no travelers sought it, and those who stumbled across it rarely returned. The few who did never spoke of what they saw, not because they wouldn't, but because they couldn't. For generations, locals whispered of a group they called the Silent Order. Men and women cloaked in black robes, faces hidden, mouths sealed. Some said they were monks seeking enlightenment. Others swore they were occult, worshippers of something far older than the gods. Whatever they were, their name was spoken only in hushed tones, for to say it too loud was to invite their attention. The order worshipped what they called the darkness between worlds. Not the night sky, not the stars, but the void beyond them. They believed the universe was nothing more than thin glass, and behind it, something ancient was waiting, watching, listening, and if you called to it, if you offered silence, blood, and devotion, it would answer. Their rituals began quietly. Midnight processions through the woods, circles drawn in ash, fires that burned without smoke. But soon, villagers noticed things far more sinister. First, the livestock began to vanish. Goats, cattle, even the dogs that guarded the village, all gone, their pens slick with blood but no tracks leading away. Then the children began to disappear. Families woke to find cribs empty, doors locked from within, no sign of struggle except for a single mark painted on the wall, a circle split by a jagged line, the symbol of the order. Those who lived close to the forest swore they could hear voices drifting through the trees at night, not chants, not songs, but whispers, endless, overlapping whispers, speaking in a language no one could understand. And then came the silence. Travelers who dared pass through the region spoke of an unnatural stillness. Birds would not sing. Leaves would not rustle. Even the wind seemed afraid to breathe. And in that suffocating quiet, you could feel eyes on you, hundreds, thousands, watching from the shadows. The villagers tried to fight back. They gathered torches, stormed the woods, and sought to burn out the order. But the deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. So quiet, they could hear their own hearts beating in their chests. One by one, they vanished, swallowed by the dark. Only a handful returned with their tongues cut out, their eyes wide with terror, their hands forever trembling. From that day forward, no one dared cross into the forest. The village itself slowly withered. The roads collapsed, the houses rotted, and the last remaining families fled. But the order did not die. Their processions continued deeper and deeper into the night, and though their mouths were gone, their whispers grew louder. Some say the order found a way to speak without sound, their thoughts carried directly into the mind. Others say they had opened a door, just a crack, to the thing they worshipped, the darkness between worlds. And from that crack, something seeped through. Shadows began to move against the light. Shapes flickered at the edge of sight. At night, the stars overhead seemed fewer, as if swallowed, one, by something vast and hungry. And then the final sign appeared. A traveler from a distant land, bloodied and broken, stumbled into a nearby town. His mouth was sewn shut with black thread. His eyes had been burned away, and carved into his chest, with a hand that shook but never faltered, were 3 words. The order comes. The silent order was no longer a whisper. It had become a warning, and soon it would become a plague. The warning was not enough. Though the traveler's mutilated body should have silenced all curiosity, human nature has always been drawn to the forbidden, and where there is silence, there will always be someone desperate to hear what lies beyond it. It began with scholars, men of parchment and ink, who dismissed the tales of the silent order as nothing more than superstition. Yet when they found fragments of old manuscripts, hidden in abandoned villages, buried beneath rotting floorboards, tucked inside walls. They could not resist. The fragments were written in a language that shifted beneath the eye. Letters seemed to bleed into one another. Lines rearranged themselves when no one was looking, and symbols crawled across the page like living insects. The manuscript spoke of a God not bound by flesh or form, a God that did not live within the stars, but between them, a God that thrived not on prayers, not on worship, but on silence. The Order had called it the darkness between worlds. The text called it the Veil Eater. It was said this being could hear every sound in creation, every scream, every song, every whisper, and that silence was its hunger. Where silence fell, it could seep through, like water through cracked stone. The Order believed that if the world fell still enough, the Veil Eater would awaken. The scholars should have burned the pages. Instead, they copied them, studied them, obsessed over them, and one by one they began to change. At first, it was small things. A scholar who once loved music suddenly smashed his lute into splinters, screaming that the sound was an abomination. Another sealed her windows and doors, desperate to block out the noise of the street. Yet another cut out his own tongue with a kitchen knife, claiming, "The whispers told me to." And still, the research continued. The deeper they read, the worse it became. Some claimed they could hear voices in the quiet of night, not voices from outside, but from within their own skulls, whispering, murmuring, laughing softly in a language older than time. Others reported shadows that move without light, crawling up their walls and ceilings even in the dead of day. One man, a priest-turned-scholar, dared to translate an entire passage aloud. His congregation gathered to hear it, believing it to be blasphemy, but curious nonetheless. When he reached the final line, the torches in the church snuffed out. The crowd was plunged into total darkness. When the light returned, the priest was gone. All that remained was a black scorch mark on the stone floor, shaped like a man with arms outstretched. Panic spread. The manuscripts were seized and burned, but the fire would not consume them. The flames hissed, recoiled, and rose higher. Smoke thickened into unnatural shapes, hands reaching, faces screaming, eyes opening and closing in the black haze. And from within the crackling fire came a sound no one expected. Silence. Not the hiss of flames, not the crack of wood, not even the cries of those watching. Just a silence. When the fire finally died, the manuscripts lay untouched. Not a page singed, not a letter lost. And yet, everyone in that room swore the text had changed. Now, the pages no longer described how to call the Veil Eater. They described when, and the when was near. From that night onward, the Order grew bolder. No longer confined to the forest, they spread like a shadow across cities and kingdoms. Manuscripts appeared in libraries, temples, and homes. Not stolen, not delivered. Simply there, a book that should not exist, resting on a desk. A scroll unrolling itself in the middle of the night. Pages that whispered even when closed. And everywhere they appeared, silence followed. Birds fell quiet. Rivers stilled. Entire towns slept without dreams, waking pale and hollow, as if drained of something essential. The Order symbol, the jagged circle, began to appear, painted in blood on walls, carved into stone, etched into flesh. Always the same, always spreading, always near. And still, the manuscript spoke of one final truth. The Order was not worshiping the Veil Eater. They were preparing the world for it. By the time the manuscripts appeared in cities, it was already too late. The Order had grown. What was once a forgotten cult hidden in the woods had become a shadow network, spreading across continents. They moved silently, invisibly through temples, schools, and even palaces. Their members were everywhere, servants, scholars, priests, guards. No one knew who they could trust. The Silent Order had perfected their initiation rites. Recruits were buried alive for 3 nights, sealed in coffins lined with salt and ash. They were fed only ashes soaked in blood, and if they survived, they clawed their way back to the surface with no voices left, their tongues already cut away. Those who emerged were never the same. Their eyes stared too long. Their shadows didn't move right. And sometimes in the dead of night, they were seen speaking without mouths, thoughts spilling directly into minds of those nearby, invasive and cold. Wherever the order planted roots, the world began to warp. In one kingdom, crops that should have grown tall and golden instead bled when harvested, their stalks dripping red into the earth. In another, children were born without eyes, hollow sockets staring into nothing. Some still lived, others wailed endlessly until they withered away. Travelers told of towns where no one slept. Doors stood open all night, lamps flickered, and every citizen stood in the streets, motionless, staring at the sky as though waiting for something to arrive. And in those towns, the stars overhead seemed fewer. Whole constellations blinked out as if swallowed by an unseen void. The scholars who had once studied the manuscripts began to vanish. Some were found hanging in their studies, blood painting the order symbol on the walls. Others were never seen again. Rumors claimed they had been taken, not killed, not dead, but dragged into the silence that the order served. One event marked a turning point. In a great cathedral, during a feast of worship, the Silent Order revealed themselves. They did not storm the gates or shed blood with swords. No, they simply appeared, cloaked figures standing at the altar, their faces hidden, their mouths sewn. A hush fell across the crowd, and then, without a word, every torch and candle extinguished. Darkness swallowed the hall. When light returned, the congregation was gone. Hundreds of people vanished in an instant. Only the order remained, their hands lifted to the ceiling as if offering the emptiness itself to something above, and etched into the stone floor, glowing faintly as though alive, were words that no human tongue could pronounce. From that day on, the order was no longer whispered of. It was feared. Entire villages emptied overnight, leaving only silence in their place. Great cities reported entire districts abandoned, doors locked, meals still warm on tables, as if families had simply stood up and walked into the night. And the silence grew. Animals stopped making noise. Rivers ran soundless. Even storms seemed muted, their lightning flashing without thunder. It was as though the very world was being drained of sound, preparing for something to step through. The awakening had begun, and those who dared listen closely swore they could hear it, a low, endless whisper rising beneath the silence, not from above, not from below, but from somewhere in between. A whisper that promised release, a whisper that promised power, a whisper that promised an end. The veil was thinning, and soon the darkness between worlds would no longer be waiting. It would be here. The order had always thrived in secrecy, but by the time the awakening began, they no longer needed to hide. Their silence had already spread across the earth like a disease. At first, it was sudden muteness. People woke in the night to find their voices gone, their mouths moving but no sound escaping. Whole villages fell into wordless despair, unable to scream, unable to pray, unable to cry for help. And yet, even without sound, the whispers still came, soft, invasive, slithering into the silence of every mind. The order's presence grew undeniable. In the dead of night, cities were plunged into unnatural stillness. No dogs barking, no merchants calling, not even creak of doors or the flutter of wings. And in that stillness, cloaked figures appeared in the streets, moving in endless procession, carrying symbols carved into their own flesh. The sacrifice of silence had begun. In one coastal kingdom, fishermen rowed out to sea at dawn and never returned. Their boats drifted back empty, their nets soaked not with water, but with thick, black blood. In another city, bells tolled from midnight, and then shattered into dust, leaving the air empty, forever robbed of their sound. And in the largest capital of the age, silence descended all at once. Millions of people froze in place, their mouths stretched open in silent screams. The streets were filled with bodies that still stood upright, as if life had been stolen from them in a single breath. The manuscripts had foretold this moment. It was not enough for a single village, nor even a single nation, to fall into silence. The order demanded a planetary offering. So it spread like a plague. Birds plummeted from the skies, their cries silenced mid-flight. Wolves ran the forest with jaws open, howling into nothing. Rivers moved, but no sound of water could be heard. It was as if creation itself was being muted, stripped of its voice one breath at a time. And still the order marched. In temples, the silent priests gathered, cutting their flesh, painting their bodies in ash, kneeling before altars carved from bone. In the streets, whole families sewed their own lips shut with black thread, their trembling hands guided by whispers no one else could hear. Across the world, suicides rose to unthinkable numbers. Men, women, and children hanged themselves not in despair, but in worship, gifts of silence to the God they believed would soon awaken. The stars themselves began to die. One by one, constellations flickered out, leaving the night sky emptier with every passing hour. And those who dare look up at the heavens too long claimed to see not blackness, not emptiness, but eyes, thousands of eyes, staring down, unblinking, patient. The veil was breaking. And then came the night when the world fell completely still. Not a voice, not a whisper, not a sound remained. The oceans froze in silence. The winds refused to blow. The earth itself held its breath. The sacrifice was complete, and in that silence, the order lifted their hands to the sky, not in prayer, not in hope, but in welcome. The darkness between worlds had heard their offering, and now it was answering. The night was not like any before it. The world had given its voice. The silence was total, oppressive, suffocating, so absolute that even thought seemed to echo against nothingness. Cities stood frozen, oceans unmoving, forests still as paintings. Humanity itself was suspended in a silence deeper than death. And then the sky cracked. Not thunder, not lightning, for there was no sound, only light, a jagged tear across the heavens, bleeding red and black. Stars spilled like shattered glass into the void, and through the wound, something vast began to emerge. The silent order fell to their knees, robes soaking in blood, hands trembling with ecstasy. Their God was coming. First came the eyes. Not 2, not 10, but countless. They pressed against the crack in the sky like swollen, diseased stars, each one unblinking, each one searching. Then came the hands, impossibly long, clawed fingers scraping reality apart, peeling the heavens open as if it were parchment, and behind it, a body too vast to comprehend. Its form was ever shifting, like smoke trapped in flesh, like shadows given life. Wherever its skin touched, the sky bled. Wherever its breath fell, the world decayed. The darkness between worlds had arrived. The silent priests screamed without sound, their mouths torn open wider and wider until their faces split, blood pouring down their chests. They offered their own bodies as vessels, collapsing into convulsions as their bones bent backward. Their eyes rolled into blackness, their spines cracking like dry wood. The cult was no longer human. They became extensions of the thing, flesh puppets writhing in the streets, limbs twisting into impossible shapes, mouths stretching until their heads split apart. But worse than the cult was the silence itself. It began to spread faster, deeper, swallowing not just sound but existence. Villages vanished in moments. sucked into stillness so absolute they ceased to ever been. Mountains crumbled into quiet dust. Oceans collapsed into emptiness, their depths erased. And the people who remained, they were not spared. One by one, they fell into silence, not death, but something worse. Trapped in their bodies, unable to move, unable to speak, unable even to think without hearing whispers. Millions of humans became living statues, silent witnesses to the end. The earth was no longer a world. It was a vessel, a womb for something far older, far greater, far hungrier. And as the last of the stars died, the tear in the sky opened wide enough for the true form of the darkness to emerge. Its voice came at last. Not sound, not words, but thought, a whisper carved directly into the mind of every living soul. Your silence was the key. Your offering was pure. The void has come home. The order wept blood, their silent screams twisting into worship. The world was drowned in darkness, folded into a dimension of endless quiet. And then there was nothing. No light, no sound, no memory, only silence eternal. The silent order had won.